From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 237, recorded 5/31/2024. I'm Daniel Griffin, and you are listening to the podcast about parasitism. This is episode TWiP 237, and we are recording on May 31st. Vincent is, I spoke to him last night. He was in Sweden. He's on his way to Finland after that. No Finn. I think it's just Finland. All right. And we have some folks joining me today. So let us start, because otherwise he's going to jump in anyway, with Dixon de Pommier. Where are you coming to us from?
From the same old place, Fort Lee, New Jersey. And hello, everybody. I'm looking out my window, and it's one of those next to perfect days. Scattered clouds, nice blue sky, warm temperatures in the high 70s, low 80s, no wind, moderate humidity. I could have 100 of these days in a row. I wouldn't complain.
And we also have Christina Naula joining us from
Glasgow. Hello, good evening all. Here it's still light because we're far north. It's been a really good day today, and I've been really looking forward to this episode. So,
Christina, you got a little bit of sun today, it looks like.
I did, yes. I did. I have not really dug out the SP50 yet, but I really need to do that.
You might say the sun got a little bit of her.
Yes. You have that, the Irish suntan, which you know what the Celtic word for suntan is? It's called sunburn.
Sunburn, yeah, that's the same here.
All right.
Although you'd think to have Italian skin, because I'm half Italian, but no.
Yeah, you do.
I'm fully acclimatized to Glasgow. So.
And we have a special guest today, Dr. Marilyn Fabbri. We'll let you say hello, and then I'm going to give you a little introduction. But Dr. Fabbri, where are you coming to us from?
I am coming from my sunny apartment in Queens, New York.
She is a colleague of mine, a fellow infectious disease specialist, Optum, New York. And this is actually a case that she was involved in. So I will start by reminding everyone of the case we presented about a month ago, and then introducing it for the first time for people tuning in for the first time. But last week, 4 weeks ago, the TWiP case from 235. As I shared, I learned about this case from a colleague at work who tells me that their friend had just gotten really sick. The friend was described as having had multiple illnesses over time, but he had never been as sick as he recently got. He reported that the illness began as a diffuse muscle pain with fever. There was some sore throat. There was noted swelling in the neck, overwhelming fatigue. He tells some of his friends they feeling really terrible. And it turns out that some of his friends also are feeling poorly. Now we get a little more history. Apparently there was a week prior to the onset of his symptoms, he and a number of friends attended a large dinner where venison and boar was served. Now, this gentleman actually sees my colleague, Dr. Fabbri, in the office. Some testing is done. He feels really terrible. And despite being reassured that he should get better without treatment, he is given some sort of therapy. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to go through a number of case guesses from our emailers. And at the very end, we're going to bring in Dr. Fabbri, who saw this patient. And then we're all going to find out, not only were emailers correct, but were we correct in what was going on? All right, who wants to take that first email? Dixon?
Sure. Angelica writes, hello. Thank you for a fun and always interesting program. My guess is that the case described in episode 235 had a primary toxoplasma infection. The venison was not well cooked, and if my guess is correct, had not been frozen previously, since that kills off the latent toxocysts in muscle cells. Often a mild infection with swollen lymph nodes is a well-known characteristic. The test must have been a serology test showing presence of anti-toxo IgM antibodies in the patient's serum. No treatment unless the patient is immunosuppressed. Often no sequelae, although I have seen quite a few patients who were left with permanent visual reduction due to primary ocular toxoplasmosis infection in my job as an ophthalmologist since the early 1990s. Greetings from Lund, Sweden, Angelica.
Wow, Angelica could hang out with Vincent, I guess, right? We should connect those guys. All right, Christina?
Rod writes, "Hi all at TWiP. I studied some parasitology back in the 1980s as part of a degree in biological sciences at Northeast London Polytechnic. I have been enjoying listening to TWiP for the last few years. This is the first time I have tried to put my parasitological knowledge into practice. From the symptoms, aching muscles and consumption of undercooked venison, pork, my best guess is that they have trichinellosis. Thanks for all you do, keeping us informed, educated and entertained." And that's from Rod from North Portugal.
All right, I'll take the next one. John writes, "Hello, esteemed hosts. I'm happy to report that I have completed listening to this podcast from the first episode, and I appreciate you all and the interesting science I'm exposed to as much as a layman can be. I figured jumping headfirst with a guess is in order to celebrate being current and able to submit a guess. I just let our list, you don't have to be current to submit a guess, but anyway, if nothing else, being spectacularly wrong can encourage other bashful listeners to participate regardless of knowledge level, because something is always learned in the process, making it worthwhile. The things I noted are that we have an immunocompetent patient. Testing resulted in not needing to be treated and did not get something. The many people at this feast were potentially asymptomatic. The venison is a common thread between them and not necessarily the boar, and no diarrhea. I focused on parasites that can occur in undercooked venison, mostly because I am not nearly good enough at this to start with a differential that doesn't have the big clue we are examining this from the lens of parasitism. And I came up with Toxoplasma gondii and Trichinella spiralis. And while reading the freely available PDF of PD7, I got so excited that T. gondii seemed to fit that I began to worry that I was motivated in my reasoning because it was my first guess. But many experience this asymptomatically, explaining most guests being fine, and treatment isn't necessary for immunocompetence. So I shelved this to see if I could eliminate the other hit, as Dixon suggested to do. Trichinella, while found in boars, did not seem to suggest undercooked venison would necessarily be a vector, but I also didn't know well enough if cross-contamination of preparation could still cause this. However, some symptoms like fatigue can match, diarrhea and vomiting didn't. Since Dr. Griffin highlighted diarrhea and the fact that pigs are the main reservoir, I focused back on T. gondii. T. gondii exposures can occur from oral ingestion of undercooked meat, venison included, which all affected reported consuming. Clinical disease can consist of acute mono-like illness, fever, cervical adenopathy, fatigue, but no diarrhea. And 80-90% of acquired infections are asymptomatic, which matches what happened to the crowd that attended the meal. A PCR test can confirm, among other methods, and mild infection in immunocompetent patients does not require therapy, but drugs of choice are pyrimethamine and sulfadiazine. So my guess is Toxoplasma gondii. And if I'm wrong, I know I will learn something anyway. After listening to all your episodes, I use my meat thermometer religiously now, and I feel more mindful of the safety we enjoy in this country due to regulatory agencies and all the free knowledge provided by experts sharing their knowledge, like here at Microbe TV. Thank you for all your noble philanthropy. This educational organization and outreach you do is truly a gift to humanity of the first order, and I can't sing your praises to others enough for these programs.
Right. I guess I'm next. Joan writes, "Dear TWiP professors, I'm sitting in an airport waiting for my plane to arrive and fly me to Philadelphia to see my grandchildren. To pass the time, I thought I'd do the case study of a group of friends who felt lousy with myalgia 1 week after eating a large meal of venison and wild boar. My guess is that it's a case of trichinosis. I checked my guess by doing a quick Google search verifying that one can get trichinosis from eating undercooked venison. The CDC website says that once the parasite encysts in the muscle, there is no treatment. That is unfortunate. I wonder if the positive test that Dr. Griffin referred to is a biopsy of the affected muscle with microscopic visualization of the parasite's cysts. I look forward to hearing the responses from the other TWiPsters. Thank you for helping me pass the time in this boring airport. Best regards, Joan.
All right. Christina.
Megan writes, greetings and salutations from an unusually sunny Pacific Northwest. My guess for this episode 235 is Trichinella spiralis, or a closely related Trichinella species. Trichinella spiralis is found in game meat and after a week's incubation can cause the observed symptoms of muscle pain, fever, fatigue and swelling. Likely by the time the patient was tested, all the larvae were embedded in muscle tissue, at which point they can't be killed and anti-inflammatory drugs and painkillers could be used to keep the patient more comfortable. The positive test was likely for IgG antibodies. I suspect the parasite load of the meat was small since some people seem to be asymptomatic and the patient in this case did not experience GI symptoms beforehand, as it is usually seen in more severe cases. Thanks for creating such an engaging podcast. Megan.
All right. David writes, Dear TWiP team, thank you as always for another interesting episode and a stimulating clinical case. Given the description of the symptoms, including no digestive issues, the helpful hint regarding undercooked venison, and the lack of a need for treatment led me toward searches for risks of undercooked meat causing problems that require no treatment in general. Based on results from looking through the CDC, Mayo Clinic, apparently discover texasrealfood.com, and of course, most importantly, my trusted 7th edition of Parasitic Diseases, PDF version, my guess for this case is an infection from Toxoplasma gondii, resulting in toxoplasmosis. Looking forward to hearing the answer in an upcoming episode. Thanks again for all you do, David in Maryland.
Thomas writes, hello, everyone. I wish to express my true gratitude for all the podcasts on microbe.tv. Here is the report I am filing for the case of TWiP 235. I am currently burning the TWiP candle at both ends by listening to episodes both from oldest and newest to oldest. Starting from episode 12, Vincent and Dixon have hammered home that Toxoplasma gondii is the most successful parasite in the world, at least for mammals. Consequently, I was ready to diagnose immediately after the first sentence. I hope this case is as successful as the parasite is. I realize I am demonstrating the second worst kind of confirmation bias, in that my differential is entirely post hoc. I tried to identify signs, symptoms, or hints that would force me to seriously consider ruling out acute toxoplasmosis. The timing is my biggest obstacle, but my interpretation of figure 11.7 allows me to keep believing I will be successful if I just stick to the first thought that popped into my head. As successful as Daniel says Toxo is in episode 171. If hearing about toxoplasmosis makes me think I have it, there's a good chance I do have it. I often experience a typical clinical syndrome of chronic toxoplasmosis in immunocompetent adults, an asymptomatic state. I've been exposed to and have eaten cat feces and uncooked meat, respectively. Oh, when Daniel says he hopes this will be a fun case, my ears perk up to note any vague language which might seek to mask the potential animal nature of the patient, or, conversely, to identify any details that Daniel is referring to, a human. Based on the available evidence, I have concluded the patient is indeed human. Differential includes penguin and dog. The description of the circumstances and the progression of the disease is strongly reminiscent of the case of the 4 Cornell medical students for toxoapocalypse, which Dixon recounted in episode 13. The patient had ingested a large inoculum of T-gondiosis from undercooked meat.
I think it was toxoplasmocalypse.
Toxoplasmocalypse.
We'll work on that.
Yes, that's right. I won't. The myalgia could be tachyzoites invading muscle cells. The swollen lymph nodes in the neck are caused by tachyzoites traveling there aboard macrophages. The lack of GI symptoms rules out many other potential infections and is consistent with toxoplasma. Trichinella is very successful, but not as successful as toxo. Fatigue from venison could be chronic wasting disease. Oh, I see. Fortunately, no human cases of CWD are known. Symptoms also fit infectious Hodgkin's lymphoma, which doesn't exist. Another possibility is zoonotic spillover from Epstein-Barr virus from undercooked cervid flesh. This latter 3 have a combined success of 0. Indeed, deer would freeze cat feces with liquid nitrogen before accidentally ingesting any. However, as Vincent had previously pointed out, deer are quite frugal. It has further proven difficult to motivate deer to invest in technology that doesn't benefit them and which they don't understand. Best regards, Tomas. P.S. I reached out to the owner of the venue where the meal was served, and they told me the venison was fine. It was, in fact, cooked so well that the inside of the meat was still glowing red hot when it was served. He went on to make the frivolous claim that while the people who became ill reported no toxic habits, he had personally seen one of them smoking cat feces in the parking lot. That's an interesting take on life in general, I thought.
All right, Christina.
That's why I was making funny faces earlier, because I was reading ahead.
Okay.
Hawken writes, greetings from a balmy Athens. This month's case was an interesting one to ponder. Based on the mirth in Dixon's voice when discussing the new case, as well as the background of diffuse myalgia and wild game being served undercooked, I'd have to go with a case of trichinellosis. While it was somewhat suspicious, not everyone who ate the wild boar had symptoms. It made me wonder if perhaps their individual cuts of meat had less larvae in them, or were perhaps more thoroughly cooked. Without having tried it myself, I suppose I'll never know. While Sarcocystis nesbitti and cysticercosis occur to me as differentials based on clinical signs alone, the clinical case history fits better with a trichinella infection. I don't know if you all saw this article, but it was a neat study looking at what antihelmintics might work to inactivate larvae encysted in pigs prior to their slaughter and entrance into the food supply chain. Thanks again, Hawken. And I suppose we can put that link up in the show notes for later. It's a science article published in Science magazine.
Yeah, it's a clever idea. Ayal writes, Dear Vincent and the sages of the eukaryotic world, greetings from Sydney and the land down under. Get a little bit of a weather report. And actually part of his guess involves a conversation with AI, but I'm just going to jump into his guess, human guess, looking through Google for parasites infecting both deer as well as humans. 4 came up: Toxoplasma gondii, Trichinella, Cryptosporidium, and Giardia. I've ruled out crypto and Giardia as those would result in gastrointestinal symptoms which are missing in the case. Between Trichinella and Toxo, I would lean toward Trichinella, as Toxo typically doesn't result in severe systemic symptoms, and apparently Trichinella is famous for causing severe myalgia. Also, I picked up on Vincent's comments to Dixon, leading me to believe this specific parasite might be of special interest to Dixon. Not sure if you and the listeners are aware, but over the last year, there has been a space race going between major industry incumbents and newcomers to develop competent AI assistants. And we actually get kind of a very long discussion with ChatGPT, which we all enjoyed, but we will spare our listeners. All right, Dixon, we're moving you way ahead to the next guest.
Yep, I saw that. I am on point. Carol writes, hello all. As soon as I heard this case, especially with the consumption of wild boar, pig by another name, and venison, I immediately knew it had to be Trichinella species parasites. The most common species is Trichinella spiralis, and I suspect that is the one causing all the difficulty. I know that 2 other species exist, Pseudospiralis and Britovi, but must admit that I don't know much about either without doing some research. Maybe Dr. DePalmier, who is the expert in this parasite, can shed some light on the differences from T. spiralis. Perhaps he can. Anyway, the dinner friends must have received a pretty large dose of the parasite, since lower than 10 larvae per gram of tissue consumed does not usually produce symptoms. Yikes for them. Being that I'm a lab tech, I'd love to know if an eosinophil count was done on their blood samples. I would expect it to be elevated, maybe in a few weeks, 3 weeks or later. Serologic testing for Trichinella spiralis antibody could be done to confirm the diagnosis. The dinner chefs should have done a quick freeze at minus 40 degrees C to kill the parasites, but maybe it was fresh from a day's hunt. Treatment should be given to stop any adult worms still in the intestine from producing larvae, using steroids and either albendazole or mebendazole, since the friends are experiencing severe symptoms. Unfortunately, those larvae, which have already migrated to the muscle tissues, are there for life, as no meds are known to kill tissue larvae as far as I know. I love lifelong friends, but I don't think I would want this particular one. Hope to win a book someday, as I really enjoy your podcast. Thanks, Carol.
James writes, actually, there are several parasites one might gather from meat. Trichinella is the leading contender in my mind. I'm thinking of the boar here, although I guess the deer could also be the source. Disease course seems about right. Toxoplasmosis, we usually think of cat litter and feces, but you can also get it from raw meat. Seems like this may be the most global of parasites with very little host specificity. Have you heard of the hypothesis that toxo causes risk-taking behavior in the host? Mice lose their fear of cat urine and people drive too fast. Is the toxo helping to feed the felines? But primary toxo can give you a flu-like or mono-like acute illness. Some cysticercae from tapeworms are, I guess, in the differential. But I'm thinking Dixon disease or Trichinella spiralis. And that is from James, who has previously been a guest on the podcast, if I remember correctly.
He was on.
Yeah.
All right. Jason writes, greetings, TWiP hosts. It is a pleasant 18 degrees C here in Seattle, and the city's flowers are in full bloom. In the case of the distressed deer diner from episode 235, the patient would seem to have become infected with Toxoplasma gondii. As a result of eating undercooked venison, an IgM assay test could provide laboratory confirmation of acute stage toxoplasmosis. As this patient is immunocompetent, it is likely that disease progression will be both mild and self-limited. Therapy via pyrimethamine and sulfadiazine is not necessarily indicated unless more serious signs and symptoms manifest. Warm regards from Jason. Okay, Dixon. Let us unmute you.
Dixon unmutes. Then Kenzie writes, I believe that the causative agent of this case study is Toxoplasma gondii. Symptoms of toxoplasmosis include fatigue, swollen lymph nodes, specifically the neck, fever, myalgia, and headache. This parasite is often transmitted through undercooked meat, such as venison or boar. This pathogen is a single-cell, comma-shaped parasite that is found worldwide. Typically, no treatment is necessary, though supportive measures may be taken. The incubation period for this infection is 4 to 21 days. The symptoms, the incubation period, and treatment match the symptoms presented in the case study almost perfectly. When considering this parasite, it is important to know that most people who are infected appeared asymptomatic, which explains why most attendees of the dinner did not get sick afterwards. One interesting fact about this parasite is that it can be associated with several cases of schizophrenia. I had not heard that, and I'm not sure it's verified, but that was an interesting comment.
Justin writes, hello, wonderful hosts. My first thought for parasitic infection from undercooked venison was trichinella, though the symptoms do not match, and the treatment suggestion would have been different in that case. After some research, Toxoplasma gondii came up as a potential, as infections can occur with improper handling of venison meat. The symptoms fit very well, as does the treatment, considering that the seropositivity for toxo in America is estimated to be 11%. I wonder how many of the people unaffected had immunity due to past exposure. Thanks for the great podcast, Justin. Shall I do the next one, because that was really short?
Sure.
Nathan writes, "Hi team, and thank you for continuing to release a fascinating podcast with interesting cases. I learned about the podcast as I am one of Christina Naula's diploma in tropical medicine and hygiene students at Glasgow University. Hi Nathan. And wanted to submit my suggestion for the most recent cases. Hopefully not too late. I listened to this episode on a long drive as some revision in the lead up to the upcoming DTMH exam. A case of illness in some, but not all attendants at an event serving bravely undercooked venison and boar, with presentation of myalgia, fever, sore throat, and lymphadenopathy a week after the event could fit with infection of Toxoplasma gondii. This protozoan parasite can be sourced from raw or undercooked venison, although most immune-competent hosts are asymptomatic from infection. Around 10 to 20% can present with cervical lymphadenopathy and or a flu-like illness, with an incubation period of around 5 to 23 days, in keeping with the timing of this disease. In most cases, no treatment is required, which it would also fit with the reassurance given alongside his positive test result. Hope I'm right in my first submission. Nathan Williamson, and he's a GP in England.
All right. Martha writes, "Dear TWiP hosts, I enjoy these TWiP cases, although I tend to get sucked down one or more rabbit holes. So I will try to be prompt and brief. The CDC recommends cooking venison to an internal temperature of 160 F. The meat thermometer was patented in 1942. I didn't know that. That's great. So one does not need to poke one's thenar eminence to gauge doneness." But there are a number of sites on the internet suggesting internal temperatures as low as 120 to 130 F for venison. So it's not surprising that these people were eating rare meat. Since I Googled this information, venison recipes have been showing up in my Google News stream.
Right.
The prevalence of infected deer in the USA varies by region, ranging from 15 to 74%. Now, in the USA, 12 to 18% of the human population have been infected, so it's not surprising that the event featuring undercooked wild game resulted in some symptomatic infections. Those without symptoms may have had prior infection or be in that portion of the population that is asymptomatic with infection. Since the patient is symptomatic, it is not unreasonable to treat him even though he is immunocompetent. Ideally, those who put on this event would notify all attendees. For those people who are immune compromised or pregnant, an infection with Toxoplasma gondii is more worrisome. Best wishes to you all, Martha.
Anne writes, "Hi all. Regarding the boar and venison dinner participants, my initial guess was Trichinella spiralis because of the boar meat and Dixon's confidence. However, reading more about parasitic diseases associated with consumption of undercooked meats and the clinical presentation, including cervical lymphadenopathy and fever, my guess is Toxoplasma gondii. As always, thank you for all you do for science education."
All right, Christina, you've got the next one. Rafid writes.
Okay, Rafid writes, "Hello, TWiP team. I think there are two possible parasitic diagnoses for a group of people getting sick after eating undercooked boar and venison. It could be Trichinella spiralis for the boar or Toxoplasmosis gondii from the venison. Although primary toxo infection is usually asymptomatic or mild, flu-like symptoms with generalized adenopathy occasionally occurs. For those interested in the May 1st, 2024 issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, there is a clinical problem case of a healthy 30-year-old woman who developed acute respiratory failure from severe bilateral pneumonia requiring ICU and intubation. It was only after 3 days of intubation that a history elicited that she cooked and ate venison 20 days before getting ill. The deer was hunted in Alabama. The patient had a very high parasitemia and responded to trimethoprim sulfamethoxazole.
We just call it TMP sulfa.
Okay, right. TMP sulfa. I'm sure it's got some kind of generic name as well. There was a concern that virulent Amazonian T. gondii had reached the USA, but PCR showed it was regular T. gondii. The patient was checked for various immune deficiencies and was found to be normal. Back to our case, toxoplasmosis is my humble guess.
All right.
From Rafid.
Now, the first Vienna Parasitology Passion Club. Hello, guys. Dear, do you like that DEER TWiP host? That was clever.
Oh, I didn't notice.
Yeah, dear.
Good point. Yeah.
Dear TWiP host, this case about a group of multiple sick dinner guests after eating undercooked venison and wild boar leaves us with only a small number of differential diagnoses. While white-tailed deer are host to a veritable cornucopia of parasitic infections, only few are pathogenic to humans: toxoplasmosis and trichinosis. While trichinosis can be contracted by eating undercooked boar meat, which was served at the dinner party, we would expect the majority of the guests to develop GI symptoms shortly afterwards and more systemic symptoms a while later. Furthermore, several characteristic symptoms of trichinosis, like periorbital edema, rash, and conjunctivitis, are conspicuously absent here. Finally, trichinosis is a potentially fatal disease that should be treated if possible with albendazole or mebendazole, while the case talks of self-limited disease. Toxoplasmosis is often asymptomatic, although up to 20% of immunocompetent adults develop symptoms during acute infection. Symptoms often include unspecific flu-like symptoms, lymphadenopathy, fatigue, and myalgia, as also seen in our patients. We do think this may be the more likely diagnosis, considering their deer rarely snack on small rodents. Thank you for putting venison on. They're from that, yeah, okay. Putting venison, such a great game. All the best, Michelle and Alexander from the First Vienna Parasitology Passion Club.
Ed writes, Dear TWiP gang, greetings from southeast Minnesota, where it has rained about every other day recently and everything is green and blooming. Today is a little cooler, high 64F, 18C. Severe myalgia and facial swelling 1 week after ingestion of game meat, along with Dixon's interest, made me jump straight to trichinosis. I am puzzled why the patient was initially told no treatment was necessary. Coincidentally, an outbreak of trichinosis from T. nativa, acquired from undercooked Canadian black bear meat, was described just recently. I am a physician and have an old microscope and a collection of vintage slides. I attach a photomicrograph of a beautiful circa 1950 slide of Trichinella spiralis in a rat tongue. The image was obtained with a 4x objective and spans about 3 millimeters across. Maybe some of the TWiP gang need a new screensaver? Long-time listener and first-time guesser, Ed in Minnesota. It's a very lovely slide.
That is beautiful. Yeah, I really like that.
It is beautiful, yeah.
Yeah.
So we get a couple more guesses, and then we're going to bring on Dr. Fabbri to tell us what it was. So it sounds like it really, for our emailers, was a distinction between maybe toxo or trichinella. Unless, was there something else? So I'll start with you, Dixon, that was in your differential?
No, those are the two that I thought a lot about and couldn't make a decision without a diagnostic test.
Okay.
So I think that I'm not going to stick my neck out.
All right, Christina, what were you thinking?
It's leaning towards trichinosis, as you could probably guess.
So I have to admit, first of all, I misread boar as bear. so mean, the first thing, obviously, that came to mind was Trichinella, and I hadn't really thought any further about it at all. And it was only until this last email that I thought, hold on, bear, boar. I thought, different animals. So that was a bit silly, I suppose. But there we go. So I hadn't actually thought at all of toxoplasma. I was thinking quite possibly because of the bear. I was very much focused on Trichinella. So I think I might be completely wrong, but I think I'm just going to stick with it.
Okay, so we got Trichinella versus Toxo. And so, Dr. Fabbri, take it away. Tell us your
Wait, you didn't say what you thought.
Oh, well,
you already know.
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why and what I think. Okay, so here's a couple of the hints. I'm going to go back to the case and sort of walk through it, why I'm thinking, and also I'll comment on some of our emailers. So let's see what happens. So, first we get this history of symptoms after, let's see where we got, after eating venison and boar, right? And then I think we get the issue that everyone who got sick had the venison, right? So I'm sort of thinking of the venison maybe as the vehicle here. Let's see if we talked much about that. The next is so now I'm thinking about venison as maybe the vehicle here because not everyone eats the boar. And you can get trichinella from venison. And someone brings up the fact that as horrific as this may seem, deer are not pure herbivores. They actually sometimes, I've actually seen videos of deer eating meat. Oh my, it just seems wrong to me. So yeah, right. Sure. The other was kind of the clinical presentation, right? We classically think of trichinella as initially you've got that diarrhea. And then periorbital edema, I mean, clinically, we actually see that. We see eosinophilia in the blood work, kind of a different presentation. Here we're seeing sore throat, like a mono-like illness, so sore throat, cervical adenopathy, fatigue. So really we think of as like a mono-like illness. And in our mono-like illnesses, we think of Epstein-Barr, we think of CMV, and we actually think of toxo. The other was sort of the number of people that attended, sort of looking at a percentage of how many people attended, who got sick. So I was initially thinking toxo when this was kind of presented. And then also, knowing Dr. Fabbri and her telling the patient, oh, this is a self-limited illness, you really don't need to be treated. Then I'm thinking, well, I probably wouldn't have said that if it was trichinella. So I'm putting it all together. So now Dr. Fabbri can embarrass me. We'll see. Okay. But Dr. Fabbri, you want to take it away?
Sure. So this was a very elaborate meal. It was 11 courses. I don't know how many courses had venison, but the last course was the backstrap of the venison, which is apparently a raw meat. And he did see urgent care before he saw me, but by the time he saw me, he actually had a friend that already had been diagnosed. He brought me the friend's serologic results, and by then the Westchester County Department of Health had already put out a press release asking for people to contact them if they attended this American Legion dinner. So, by the time he got to me, it was already pretty apparent. He made a case basically that he thought he had acute toxoplasmosis, and I did agree with him that was the likely diagnosis. He did have no eosinophils. He did have an atypical lymphocytosis, which you can see with toxo. He also had a very mild transaminitis and ALT of around 93. So, given the whole picture, he was having fevers to 103. His wife was at home pregnant. He just made a whole argument for me that I decided to treat him, even though, he's a healthy host. He just was feeling horribly. And I did start him actually not on pyrimethamine and sulfadiazine just because of all the issues in the past with pyrimethamine pricing and obtaining it for patients since it was bought out. But anyway, I gave him Bactrim or trimethoprim sulfa. And within 2 weeks, he was completely asymptomatic, felt great, and did well.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So before we go into a discussion, Marilyn, what is your favorite number between 1 and 19, including 1 and 19?
I'll say 10.
All right. We have a winner. Instead of a random
10.
generator,
Oh,
you just selected our book winner. So who is
okay.
who is
That's
number
good.
10? Let's scroll through here.
Carol.
Who is it, Christina?
Carol.
All right. So, Carol, if you're listening, and hopefully you are a winner. So, Carol, apparently I've been informed that you want to send that email to incubator@microbe.tv and put in the subject line, I want a book. And then you're going to put in the content there, your name, full name, where you live. If you're here in the US, we're good to go, just your address. But if it's international, we're going to need that telephone number as well. So as you say, hope to win a book someday. Today is that day.
That's right.
All right. Okay.
Well, I'm glad my student diagnosed this patient correctly. A bit embarrassed that I did not. So
You shouldn't be embarrassed.
I hope
It's a
that's not
difficult
going to
diagnosis.
backfire.
No, it was. I mean, it was. I think we had that back and forth. Depending upon some of the stuff. Could it have been one or the other? It was a good differential, and it's. That's why we always say the lab is so important, right?
You bet.
I somehow never really think of toxoplasmosis making people really ill. Somehow I always think of the immune compromised host in the first instance, or in pregnancy related toxoplasmosis. I've never really, probably not spent enough time thinking about an immune competent person who becomes infected with toxoplasmosis for the first time. So I think I'm definitely going to read up, and maybe between Daniel and Dr. Gabri, we can maybe learn a little bit more. That would be great. Fabbri, sorry, I am.
All right, Marilyn, you want to tell us a little bit about toxo?
So basically, humans are generally infected through several mechanisms. One is ingesting meat that carry toxoplasmosis cysts. Another form is actually humans either eating food or drinking water or, touching soil that carries cysts that are excreted usually by cats. Cats are really the only definitive host for toxoplasmosis. Other mechanisms of transmission include transplant. That's another mechanism. And obviously maternal fetal. I did bring up sexual transmission only because when this patient mentioned his wife was very pregnant at home, I decided to do a little extra research because it's such a devastating infection. If acutely in pregnant women can lead to congenital toxoplasmosis syndrome. And interestingly, there are some reports of being able to find toxoplasma cysts actually in semen, human semen, and also regarding increased seroprevalence of toxoplasmosis in the sexual partners of patients who have toxoplasmosis. So it's not considered a major transmission by the CDC, but in this scenario, I did tell the patient to avoid, while he was febrile and ill and potentially parasitemic, to maybe avoid sexual activity with his wife, just because there's a lot we don't know. And I did obviously counsel him to have her get tested with her OBGYN. She fortunately did not ingest any of the meat, but still there was a concern there.
I've seen cases of congenital toxo, and it's just devastating.
Yeah. I mean, I
worry that we underdiagnose this disease, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. This is the first acute case I've ever seen. Yeah. So it's just because this was in the media and because there was a cluster. So someone actually did the work, and this was I don't know if there's going to be an MMWR report regarding this outbreak, but this is a perfect opportunity to really look at what percent of patients have asymptomatic infections versus symptomatic, because you have a consistent meal, probably consistent inoculums. This is a great opportunity. According to the patient, it was several people. It wasn't just him. It was a lot of people that were ill. I don't think they all sought medical attention, but I do think it was more than just the 2 or 3.
Yeah, I think there were over 100 people at the meal. So I, sort of, because it was a colleague of mine. This is like hanging out in the ICU chatting, getting some details here. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people, right? You show up in urgent care. Yeah, I don't feel great, a little tired, sore throat. Where they do a rapid strep, they send you on your way. And one of the characteristic things I've noticed, because sort of fortunately made a few of these diagnoses, is a lot of times the adenopathy is posterior cervical, which is a little bit like, why is the back? And so a little bit interesting that way. We had a case on before.
So way at the back, Daniel.
Yeah, you feel it in the back. So it's a posterior cervical. So it's in that cervical. Yeah,
in that kind of dent.
Yeah, so it's really like an occipital chain. You feel them. Because we had a case, and I was entertained by this. And this was a patient I saw when we used to have an office out in Plainview. And I think we shared it on one of the episodes. So she went with her husband back to Lebanon, right, where he's from. And remember, they had the kitfo. It was this raw meat that they ate. And maybe you had like several different types of raw meat mixed in. And but he's like, it's okay, because if you drink a shot of this alcohol right afterwards, that didn't work.
Well, you won't care if you catch it, that's all. So the 4 students at Cornell a long time ago who got sick from toxo because they were late for a lecture given by the man who performed the first heart transplant. And they woofed down their almost raw hamburgers that they said, we don't care how they're cooked, just give them to us. We're hungry, but we want to go to this lecture. And they all got sick. They all were diagnosed with toxoplasma. And a lot of the basic serology was determined by those 4 patients who happened to be second-year medical students. And Dr. Benjamin Keene, who was in charge of the parasite group at that time, became a celebrity among first-year and second-year medical students throughout the city by finding out that these students were sacrificing their lives just to go to a lecture. And of course, they didn't put it that way at the time, but and then they went on to normal development, just like this patient did. They didn't have the drugs that we have now. So I don't know what they did.
A lot of times you don't need to do. It gets better.
But they were sick, though. They weren't feeling well. So, they had an excuse for not going to class.
Now, Dixon, I heard this story a little differently, and you'll have to tell me if mine was that the lecturer was a little impatient because it was a barbecue thing and he was going to be talking and the burgers weren't quite done. And he had sort of said, just serve them because I want to give my talk. So they were anxious. They ate their undercooked burgers.
So who was the physician who performed the first heart transplant?
Oh, that's a good one.
He was South African.
Yeah. I don't know. You got me stumped. Do you remember?
I used to remember his name, and now I can't think of it.
All right, the 2 of us.
Christian Barnard.
Yes, that's the one.
Dr. Google.
You must have looked that one up on Dr. Google.
I did, yes, of course I did.
I'm going to reach out to him and find out. Did you rush them?
I don't think he's with us any longer.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
He's probably in need of something more than a heart transplant.
All right, anything else we should know?
It's an amazing infection, though, isn't it? I mean, it's just the way it carries out its life cycle, the way it commandeers mitochondria and subverts an immune response that would kill it. And the cat is not the only host for this. All felines,
right? Yeah.
So you can have panthers and tigers and lions and all those cats out there. They could be transmitting this as well.
Yeah.
And, that's something. But the other thing I thought about was maybe this is 2 things. You can catch toxo from the deer, and you can catch trichinella from
Could
the
have had
boar.
a double. Yeah, that would be quite something.
And now a double hit. Now that can't occur to the same patient, or it could. Actually,
it certainly could, right? And you would
And
think
he
this would have been the
both meats.
perfect situation, right? Because
I would have loved to have seen that evolve. The test came back positive. Which test? Both tests.
That's why we keep you in the lab, Dixon.
That wasn't the. Well, no, I used to get a big charge out of stuff like this. And Dr. Brown, who was my mentor, used to say, never stop when you see one parasite. Keep looking, because these people are susceptible because of some habit that they have, like eating unwashed vegetables or raw meat or things like this. You can have more than one thing, not a problem.
Occam was not a doctor.
Occam, that's right. He's a barber.
Darn things as you please. All right,
Occam is a barber that learned his trade from Sweeney Todd.
Yeah. We've got an email we're going to read, and then we have a new
I think we read that.
Oh, did we already read this one?
I think we read that last time.
All right. That looks familiar.
It rings a bell.
So we're just going to jump into our new case. And I was a little bit like, I'm going to do this one, or there's another one. That was one Dixon and I talked about. So I'm going to space it out. I'm going to do this one today. But then in a month, I already have the one that we're going to talk about. We'll get a guest on to talk about that one. But here's a new case. So this is recent. I saw this gentleman. I always joke when I'm at Columbia, right? All the men are gentlemen. All the patients are historians. I'm like, so many historians coming here to get their care. But this gentleman was in his 60s, and he suffers from HIV/AIDS, right? So his CD4 count is less than 50. CD4 percentage, less than 5%, elevated viral load. There are some issues with compliance for his therapy. He had a prior CNS toxoplasmosis, and in his case, it was a toxoplasmosis reactivation severe enough to require a craniotomy. Okay, so that's passed. Also had developed disseminated Mycobacterium avium complex, so it had disseminated MAC. Now, he comes in this time, right, with fever, very, very watery diarrhea times 4 days, right? So we get a little bit of a history. So this is a gentleman who predominantly lives down in Georgia, but he doesn't really want to get his HIV care down there. Not sure he's really getting great care coming here and not taking his medicines, but he comes up here for his HIV care. He stays in an apartment in the city, drinks, normal tap water. Normal New York City unfiltered tap water. We don't have any kind of other exposures. But now he's up here in New York, and he just has this voluminous watery diarrhea for 4 days. So we go ahead and we send off some stool testing, and it comes back with this very characteristic diarrhea that occurs in this patient population when they come here and hang out with us in New York. And I think that's
no more hints. No more hints.
It's a broad differential, but I think I've given you what you need to know. All right. Well, we're going to wrap that up. If you want to send in your case guesses, right? So this is important. So you're going to send in your guesses to TWiP at microbe.tv, and you're going to put in your subject line, guess for case TWiP 237, so we know which one it is. So put TWiP 237 in the subject line. Also, this is sort of my new thing. Just put also in there if you won a book before, or put in still hoping to win a book. So we know to enter you or not into the drawing. Send us those guesses. We'll probably post this in a couple weeks, and then it'll be about 4 weeks from now that we record our next episode. So try to get those cases in before the end of June. If you like what we do, or you don't like what we do, but you want us to just keep doing it, then consider supporting the shows of Microbe TV. Go to microbe.tv/contribute. You can also go to parasiteswithoutborders.com. You can click on the donate button there. All the support helps us do what we're doing. So let me thank everyone. I'm going to start by thanking our special guest, Dr. Marilyn Fabbri. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And you,
Thank you, Marilyn.
And you can find her at Optum Tri-State, right, in Lake Success.
Absolutely.
Oh, nice.
And she loves parasitic cases, particularly the real ones. Throw that in. You can find Dixon Despommier at trichinella.org, thelivingriver.org.
Yep. This was fun, as usual, and a great guest. We really had a good time, and it was a stumper. That was good. We haven't had too many stumpers, and this was good to have. I liked it a lot.
All right. And we have Christina Nalla. She is at the University of Glasgow, at Christina Nalla 1. Is that Twitter or X, Christina?
Well, I think it might be X, but I very rarely use it. But yeah, I think it's X. So yeah. Yeah, that was really good fun. And I think what I'm going to do now, before I go to sleep, I'm going to listen to episode TWiP 13, where Dixon talks about the toxoplasmoc I can't say it either. You know, the one Sorry, Daniel, you have to do it.
And you don't drink.
Thank you. No, I've just got a glass of water here. It's not vodka.
I can't believe this. I thought you were at least having a single malt on yourself.
In listening to that episode, as this parasite has been throughout the world. All right, I'm Daniel Griffin, and you can find me at Columbia University Medical Center. You can also find me on the social media, and I'm gonna actually let Dr. Fabbri do our outtake. So we're gonna get her all prepped for this. So music on TWiP is composed and performed by Ronald Jenkins and used with permission. We would like to thank ASM for their support of TWiP. And I am going to say, you've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon. And then Dr. Fabbri is going to say another TWiP is parasitic. All right, okay. Dr. Fabbri, are you ready for the lead-in?
Okay.
Okay. You're going to be judged on this.
Okay.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
You have been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Another TWiP is parasitic.